Billionaire went to his ex-wife's house with divorce papers and met his newborn baby for the first time. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. And make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. Killian Thorne adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time as he stared at his reflection in the Florida ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse office. At 36, he commanded a technology empire worth billions, yet tonight, he felt oddly disconnected from his own success. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board, its lights pulsing with the same cold efficiency that had consumed his life. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your wife called. She wanted to confirm if you'll be attending the foundation gala tonight." Killian's jaw tightened. Another charity event. Another evening of forced smiles and calculated conversations. "Tell her, I'll try to make it," he replied, already knowing he wouldn't. 20 minutes later, he was buried in quarterly projections when his phone buzzed with a text from Leora. "I'll represent us both tonight." Again, the words stung more than they should have. Leora Thorne wasn't just his wife, who saw through his armor of success to the man beneath. At their penthouse, Leora stood before her vanity mirror, applying a shade of lipstick that reminded her of better times. Her reflection showed a woman of 28 with striking green eyes and auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper. She wore an elegant navy dress that hugged her petite frame, but her smile felt practiced. "Hall, you look beautiful," Killian said from the doorway, his voice carrying a distance that hadn't been there 2 years ago when they'd exchanged vows. "Thank you. I assume you're not coming. I have the Morrison deal to review. It's worth $50 million. I know." Her eyes searching his face for any trace of the man who had once surprised her with midnight picnics on the rooftop. "It's always worth something, isn't it?" Killian loosened his tie, a gesture that once meant he was settling in for an evening with her. Now it simply meant he was getting comfortable for another night alone in his study. "The foundation will be fine without me. You're better at these things anyway." The words landed like a gentle slap. Leora gathered her clutch and wrap, her movements measured and controlled. "I used to think you were just busy. Now I wonder if you simply don't care anymore." "Leora, that's not fair." "True." She paused at the bedroom door. "When was the last time we had dinner together, Killian? Really together, not you answering emails between courses." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. She was right, and they both knew it. "I'll see you tonight," she said softly. "Or I won't." The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel buzzed with Manhattan's elite. Leora moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting air kisses and making small talk about the foundation's latest initiatives. But tonight, she felt like an actress playing a role. "Mrs. Thorne." A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find a man in his early 30s with kind brown eyes and an easy smile. "I'm David Chen from the Tribune. I was hoping to get a comment about your husband's latest acquisition." "I'm sorry, I don't discuss business matters," Leora replied politely, but something in his expression stopped her from walking away. "Actually, I was more interested in the foundation's work. Your husband's company has been incredibly generous, but I suspect the real passion comes from you." For the first time that evening, Leora's smile was genuine. "You're very perceptive, Mr. Chen." "David, please." "And it's not perception. It's obvious. You light up when you talk about the programs." "He lights up when he talks about market shares." Leora laughed, a sound that had become rare in recent months. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone said to me all evening." They found themselves at a quieter corner near the bar, discussing everything from digital literacy programs to the challenges of bridging economic divides. David was intelligent, attentive, and most importantly, present in a way that made Leora remember what it felt like to have someone's full attention. "You know," David said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server, "I interviewed your husband last month. Brilliant mind, clearly, but he seemed elsewhere." "He's always elsewhere," Leora said, then immediately regretted the admission. She wasn't the type to air personal grievances to strangers, even charming journalists. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me." "No, it's." She paused, watching couples dance to the gentle jazz ensemble. Sometimes I think I married a ghost. It was at that precise moment that Killian Thorne walked into the ballroom. He had changed his mind about the Morrison deal, or rather, his conscience had changed it for him. Leora deserved better than empty promises and absent apologies. He would surprise her, dance with her, remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. But as his eyes swept the crowd, searching for the familiar flash of auburn hair, he found something that stopped him cold. Leora was laughing. Not the polite social laugh he had grown accustomed to, but the deep musical laughter that used to echo through their home. She was standing close to a man Killian didn't recognize, their conversation clearly intimate and engaging. The man leaned in to say something that made Leora throw her head back with genuine delight, and Killian felt something dark and primal unfurl in his chest. Jealousy, raw, unexpected, and completely irrational. He watched as the stranger touched Leora's arm lightly while making a point, saw how she didn't pull away, noticed how her entire posture had softened in a way it hadn't around him in months. When had he last made her laugh like that? When had he last given her his undivided attention? When had he last looked at her, really looked at her, instead of through her? The answers came like physical blows. Too long. Far too long. Killian stood frozen at the entrance of the ballroom, watching his wife come alive under another man's attention, and realized with devastating clarity that he was still desperately, completely in love with her. But he also realized something else. He might already be too late. What would you do if you suddenly realized you were losing the most important person in your life? Killian forced himself to move, weaving through clusters of donors and socialites who tried to catch his attention. His usual confident stride felt mechanical, each step deliberate as he approached the corner where Leora stood with the stranger. "Darling." The word came out rougher than intended as he placed a possessive hand on the small of Leora's back. She turned, surprise flickering across her features before settling into careful composure. "Killian, I wasn't expecting you." Cataloging everything from his expensive but not custom suit to the genuine warmth in his expression. "I don't believe we've met." David Chen, New York Tribune. David extended his hand with easy confidence. "Your wife was just telling me about the Foundation's digital literacy program. Fascinating work." Killian's handshake was firm, perhaps a fraction too long. "Yes, Leora is passionate about her projects." The subtle dismissal wasn't lost on any of them. Leora's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but David stepped smoothly into the tension. "Actually, I was just telling Mrs. Thorne that I'd love to do a feature story on the Foundation, really showcase the human impact of what you both are doing." "We'll consider it," Killian replied before Leora could respond. "If you'll excuse us, I'd like to dance with my wife." David nodded graciously. "Of course, Leora, thank you for such an enlightening conversation. I hope we can continue it soon." As David melted back into the crowd, Killian guided Leora toward the dance floor with a firm hand that baked no argument. The string quartet was playing something slow and romantic that felt like mockery. "That was rude," Leora said quietly as they began to move together, muscle memory guiding them through steps they'd once performed effortlessly. "Was it?" Killian pulled her closer, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume. Jasmine and vanilla, the same one she'd worn on their wedding day. "I thought I was being a husband." "You thought you were being territorial." Her voice was steady, but he could feel the tension in her frame. "There's a difference." They moved in silence for several beats. Other couples swayed to the music, lost in their own worlds of contentment or pretense. "He was flirting with you," Killian said finally. Leora Unk's green eyes flashed. "He was listening to me, something you haven't done in months." "I listen, no, you hear. There's a difference." She echoed his earlier words with bitter precision. "When was the last time you asked me about my day? Really asked, not just nodded while reading your phone?" Killian's step faltered slightly. He couldn't remember. "David Chen spent 20 minutes asking thoughtful questions about work that matters to me." "You can't even remember the name of our literacy coordinator." "Miranda Santos," Killian said quickly, then felt foolish for the defensive response. "Maria Gonzalez, Miranda Santos, runs our mentorship program." Leora's voice was soft now, sad rather than angry. "See, you don't even know who works for your own foundation." The song ended, but neither of them moved to leave the dance floor. They stood there inches apart, but feeling like strangers as couples float around them. "I know I've been distant," Killian said, his voice rough. "The Morrison acquisition, the Shanghai expansion. There's always something. Killian, there's always a deal, a crisis, a reason why everything else comes second. Leora stepped back, breaking their embrace, including me. You don't come second. The words came out too quickly, too desperate. She searched his face with those remarkable green eyes that had once seen all his potential, all his dreams. When was the last time we had breakfast together? When did you last ask about my book club? Or remember that Thursdays are my yoga days? Or notice that I got my hair cut last week? Each question landed like a physical blow. He had noticed her hair, shorter, layered in a way that framed her face beautifully, but he hadn't said anything. He couldn't remember why. I notice. You notice when I'm not at company events. You notice when dinner isn't ready. You notice when I'm not available to play the perfect CEO's wife. Her voice cracked slightly. But you don't notice me. The truth of her words settled between them like a chasm. Around them, the gala continued in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, the gentle murmur of New York's elite conducting business, disguised as charity. I saw you laughing with him, Killian admitted quietly. I couldn't remember the last time I'd made you laugh like that. Something shifted in Leora's expression, a flicker of the woman who had once looked at him like he hung the moon. You used to make me laugh all the time. You used to leave little notes in my coffee mug. You used to dance with me in the kitchen while dinner was cooking. I still could. Could you? She tilted her head, studying him with a lawyer's precision. Or would you be checking your phone, thinking about quarterly projections, planning your next meeting while going through the motions? Killian opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it. She was right. Even now, part of his mind was cataloging the influential people he should greet, the conversations that could lead to opportunities. I miss you, he said instead, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. For a moment, Leora's carefully constructed composure cracked, revealing the woman underneath, vulnerable, hopeful, still in love despite everything. But missing someone who's standing right in front of you is the loneliest feeling in the world. The quartet began another piece, something livelier that encouraged couples to separate and rejoin. But Killian and Leora remained still, locked in their bubble of painful honesty. Mrs. Thorne, a server appeared beside them with practiced discretion. There's a phone call for you. They said it was urgent. Leora frowned, accepting the phone. Hello, yes. This is she. Her face went pale. When is she? I'll be right there. She handed the phone back with trembling fingers. I have to go. My sister Emma, she's been in an accident. They're taking her to Presbyterian. I'll drive you, Killian said immediately. No, I'll take a taxi. Leora, he caught her hands, feeling how cold they'd become. Let me drive you, please. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse. Then she nodded, and Killian felt something loosen in his chest. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As they hurried toward the exit, Killian's phone buzzed with what he knew would be work messages. For the first time in months, he didn't even glance at it. Tonight, his wife needed him. Everything else could wait. But as they waited for the valet to bring his car, Killian caught sight of David Chun near the hotel entrance, and the journalist's knowing look suggested that their evening was far from over. The elevator at Presbyterian Hospital moved with agonizing slowness as Killian and Leora rode up to the trauma floor. The silence between them had shifted during the 20-minute drive through Manhattan traffic, less hostile now, united by shared concern for Emma. Leora's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white against the navy fabric of her dress. She had changed from her heels into the emergency flat she kept in Killian's car, a practical habit from her days as a junior associate when crises demanded quick movement. She's going to be okay, Killian said quietly, watching the floor numbers climb. Emma's tough. Remember when she broke her wrist rock climbing and still finished the route? A small smile tugged at Leora's lips. She was 16 and showing off for that boy from summer camp. What was his name? Trevor? Tyler? Killian corrected, surprising them both. Tyler Morrison. He was terrified of her after that. The fact that he remembered made something warm unfurl in Leora's chest. There had been a time when Killian knew every detail of her family's stories, when he could recall the names of childhood friends and the dates of important events. The elevator doors opened to reveal the controlled chaos of a trauma floor. Nurses moved with purposeful efficiency while families clustered in waiting areas, their faces etched with worry and hope in equal measure. Emma Raines Leora approached the reception desk, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Room 314. She's stable, but the doctor will want to speak with you. The nurse replied with professional kindness. They found Emma propped up in bed, looking smaller than her usual vibrant self. At 25, she shared Leora's auburn hair, but had inherited their mother's blue eyes and stubborn streak. Her left leg was elevated in a cast, and butterfly bandages marked various cuts on her face and arms. Emma's face brightened despite the obvious pain. "You didn't have to leave your fancy party for me. Don't be ridiculous." Leora rushed to her sister's bedside, carefully avoiding the 4 lines as she leaned in for a gentle hug. "What happened?" "Drunk driver ran a red light, T-boned my car at the intersection near my apartment." Emma's voice was hollow but determined. "My car's totaled, but I'm too stubborn to die." Killian stood back, watching the sisters' interaction with something that felt like nostalgia. Emma had always been wary of him, protective of Leora, in the way younger siblings often were. But tonight, she offered him a genuine smile. "Thanks for bringing her, Killian. I know you two were probably doing important rich people things." "Nothing more important than this," he replied, meaning it. Dr. Patricia Winters appeared in the doorway, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone who had seen everything emergency medicine could offer. "Ms. Rains, I'm Dr. Winters. Could I speak with you privately about your sister's condition?" In the hallway, Dr. Winters explained that while Emma's injuries weren't life-threatening, the recovery would be lengthy. Broken tibia, severe bruising, possible concussion. She would need surgery in the morning to set the bone properly, followed by weeks of physical therapy. "She lives alone, works as a freelance graphic designer," Leora said, already calculating the challenges ahead. "She won't be able to manage stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment. We have social workers who can help arrange temporary housing options," Dr. Winters offered. "No," Leora said firmly. "She'll stay with us." Killian felt something shift inside his chest at that simple word. Us. When had Leora stopped thinking of their home as a shared space? "I'll have the guest room prepared," he said quietly. Dr. Winters nodded approvingly. "Family support makes all the difference in recovery. We'll keep her overnight for observation. Then you can take her home after the surgery tomorrow." When they returned to Emma's room, she was fighting to stay awake despite the pain medication. "So," she said with drowsy determination, "are you two actually talking to each other, or just coordinating my care with professional courtesy?" Leora and Killian exchanged a look, the first truly unguarded moment they'd shared in months. "We're talking," Leora said carefully. "Good, because Lee's been miserable, and you've been an idiot." Emma's medication-induced honesty was brutal but effective. "She loves you, you know, even when she's furious with you," Emma, Leora warned, but her sister was already drifting off. In the corridor outside Emma's room, Killian and Leora found themselves alone again. The hospital's night shift had settled into its quieter rhythm, punctuated by occasional pages and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. "I should stay," Leora said, settling into one of the uncomfortable waiting room chairs. "In case she needs anything, I'll stay with you." "You don't have to." "I want to." Killian sat beside her, closer than they'd been in weeks. "Emma's right. You know, I have been an idiot." Leora turned to study his profile in the harsh fluorescent lighting. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. "When had he started looking so tired?" "When did we stop talking?" she asked quietly. "I think," Killian ran a hand through his dark hair, messing the perfectly styled waves. "I think it was gradual, like watching a sunset. You don't notice the exact moment the day ends. I tried to tell you about feeling lonely, about missing us." Her voice was soft without accusation. "But you were always rushing somewhere else. I thought I was building something for us. The company, the success, the security." He turned to face her fully. "But what's the point of building an empire if you lose the person you want to share it with?" The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. This was the Killian she had fallen in love with, vulnerable beneath his confidence, capable of admitting his mistakes. "I miss talking to you," she admitted, "about everything and nothing. I miss how you used to analyze movies with me, arguing about plot holes until 2 o'clock in the morning. I miss your terrible cooking experiments," Killian said with a slight smile. "Remember the salmon and chocolate sauce disaster?" "That was innovative cuisine," Leora protested. But she was smiling too. "You ate every bite." I was trying to be supportive. "I think I lost feeling in my tongue for 3 days." Their laughter was quiet, mindful of the sleeping patients nearby, but it felt like rediscovering something precious they'd thought was lost forever. "Killian," Leora said after a moment, her voice serious again, "what happened tonight with David?" "Nothing inappropriate occurred. He was just being kind." "I know." Killian's jaw tightened slightly. "But seeing you light up when he talked to you, seeing you interested and engaged, It made me realize how long it's been since I've given you my full attention. You were jealous. Terrified, he corrected. Terrified that I'd let someone else become the person who makes you smile. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Around them, the hospital continued its nocturnal routine. But they were cocooned in their own world of tentative reconciliation. I don't want to lose you, Killian said quietly. I don't want to lose us. Leora reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. Then don't. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the empty corridor as night deepened into dawn. For the first time in months, neither of them checked their phones. But as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the hospital windows, Leora felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the antiseptic smell or her sister's accident. She had been feeling queasy for days, attributing it to stress and irregular meals. Now, as she calculated dates and symptoms, a different kind of fear began to bloom in her chest. 3 weeks later, the Thorne penthouse had transformed into something resembling a real home. Emma's presence had brought an energy that had been missing. Her art supplies scattered across the dining table, her laughter echoing from the guest room during video calls with clients, her stubborn independence forcing both Killian and Leora to work together in ways they hadn't in months. Killian found himself coming home earlier, ostensibly to check on Emma's recovery, but really to experience the warmth that had returned to their space. He would arrive to find Leora helping Emma with physical therapy exercises, or the three of them debating movie choices for their evening entertainment. Your husband makes terrible popcorn, Emma announced from her position on the couch, her casted leg propped on pillows. Too much salt, not enough butter. I'll make a note in his performance review, Leora replied, curled in the opposite corner. With a cup of herbal tea that had become her new preference, Killian emerged from the kitchen with a fresh bowl. My popcorn is perfectly calibrated for optimal flavor distribution. That's the most CEO thing you've ever said about snack food. Emma laughed. Lee, how do you live with this corporate robot? He has other redeeming qualities, Leora said, accepting the bowl with a smile that made Killian's chest tighten with familiar warmth. They had been rebuilding slowly, carefully. Conversations over breakfast, shared responsibilities for Emma's care, moments of unexpected tenderness. Yesterday, Killian had found Leora asleep on the couch with a book spelled across her chest, and instead of waking her, he had covered her with a throw blanket and dimmed the lights. But tonight, something was different. Leora seemed distracted, distant in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of their recent troubles. Earth to Lee, Emma said, waving a hand. You've been staring at that tea for 5 minutes. What's wrong? Nothing, Leora said quickly. Just tired. Killian studied his wife's profile in the lamplight. She had been tired frequently lately, going to bed earlier and struggling to wake in the mornings. He had attributed it to the stress of Emma's accident and the emotional work of rebuilding their relationship. Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez, he suggested. Make sure you're not coming down with something. I'm fine, Leora insisted. But her voice carried an odd note that made both Killian and Emma look at her more closely. The next morning, Killian left early for a breakfast meeting with potential investors from Singapore. When he returned home around noon, he expected to find Leora working in her home office and Emma sketching in the living room. Instead, he found Emma alone, looking uncharacteristically serious. Where's Leora? He asked, setting down his briefcase. She went to see her doctor. Emma's tone was carefully neutral. She should be back soon. Something in her expression made Killian's stomach tighten with unease. Is she sick? You should ask her when she gets back. Before Killian could press for more information, he heard Leora's key in the lock. She appeared in the foyer, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as she hung up her coat. Hey, she said softly, offering a wan smile. How was your meeting? Fine, Emma said. You went to the doctor. Are you feeling okay? Leora's eyes darted to her sister, who was watching the exchange with obvious concern. Could we talk privately? Emma immediately began the process of maneuvering herself off the couch. I'll go work in my room. Give you to some space. You don't have to, Leora started. Yes, I do. Emma's voice was firm but kind. Whatever this is, you need to handle it together. Once Emma had disappeared down the hallway, Killian and Leora stood, facing each other in their elegantly appointed living room. The afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows should have been romantic, but tension crackled between them like an approaching storm. Lee, you're scaring me, Killian said quietly. What did the doctor say? She took a deep breath, her hands twisting together in front of her. I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, and he had to grip the back of the nearest chair for support. Pregnant, he repeated, as if saying it would help him process the information. About 7 weeks. Dr. Martinez thinks. Leora's voice was steady, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I know this isn't ideal timing with everything that's been happening between us. 7 weeks. Killian's mind was racing, calculating backwards. 7 weeks ago, they had barely been speaking to each other. Their physical relationship had been almost non-existent, reduced to the occasional perfunctory kiss goodnight, except for that one night, the night after the quarterly board meeting when he had come home frustrated and exhausted, and she had been waiting up with a glass of wine and genuine concern about his stress levels. They had talked until late. Really talked. And then the night you waited up for me, he said softly. After the Morrison deal hit that snag, Leora nodded. I think so. That night had felt like a glimpse of their old selves. Passionate, connected, completely present with each other. It had given him hope that they could find their way back to each other. How do you feel about it? He asked carefully. Terrified, she admitted, but also happy. I know that doesn't make sense given where we are, but it makes perfect sense. Killian moved closer, his initial shock giving way to something deeper and more complex. A baby. I know, it complicates everything. The foundation work, your company expansion, she gestured vaguely between them. Leora, he reached for her hands, stilling their nervous movement. This doesn't complicate anything. This is incredible. The relief that flooded her face made him realize how afraid she had been of his reaction. Had he become so distant that his own wife feared telling him about their child? You're happy about it? She asked softly. Killian paused, trying to find words for the tangle of emotions in his chest. I'm terrified, too. But yes, I'm happy. We're going to have a baby. Leora's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. For the first time in weeks, she looked truly, completely happy. We're going to have a baby, she repeated as if testing the words. Killian pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, steady and strong, and marveled at the knowledge that another heartbeat was beginning inside her. We're going to have to tell Emma, Leora murmured against his shoulder. She's going to be insufferable about being the cool aunt. She's going to insist on designing the nursery. She's going to critique our parenting choices before the baby is even born. They were both laughing now, the joy of the moment overwhelming the lingering uncertainties. This felt right in a way that nothing had for months. But as they held each other in their sun-filled living room, neither of them could shake the feeling that their newfound happiness was fragile, precious, and potentially temporary. Outside, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. And somewhere across the city, David Chen was finishing an article about technology entrepreneurs and their philanthropic wives. 2 weeks after Leora's pregnancy announcement, their world had settled into a cautious optimism. Emma's physical therapy sessions had become family affairs with Killian, surprising everyone by researching exercises and nutrition plans with the same intensity he applied to business acquisitions. You realize you can't optimize a pregnancy like a quarterly report, Emma said from her position on the yoga mat, watching Killian arrange prenatal vitamins by absorption rates. Actually, there's significant data on folic acid timing, and Killian began. Oh God, he's going to spreadsheet the baby. Leora laughed from the kitchen, where she was attempting to follow a recipe for ginger cookies that promised to ease morning sickness. The domestic normally felt precious and fragile, like something they were all afraid to trust completely. But Killian found himself looking forward to coming home in ways he hadn't since the early days of their marriage. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Tribune reporter called about interview follow-up. Should I schedule? Killian frowned. He hadn't given any recent interviews to the Tribune. He was about to respond when Leora appeared beside him with a plate of slightly burnt cookies. Emergency meeting? She asked, noting his expression. Just work confusion, nothing important. He set the phone aside, focusing on her instead. How are you feeling? Better, actually. The ginger is helping. She settled beside him on the couch, unconsciously placing a hand over her still flat stomach. Dr. Martinez says, everything looks perfect so far. Speaking of perfect, Emma called out, have you two thought about names? Because I have opinions, terrifying opinions, I'm sure. Killian replied. They spent the evening in easy conversation, debating everything from nursery colors to childproofing strategies. It was the kind of planning session that felt like building a future together, brick by careful brick. The next morning, Killian's carefully constructed piece shattered with a phone call from his publicist. "Killian, we have a problem." Rebecca Chen's voice was tight with stress. "Have you seen today's Tribune?" "No." "Why?" He was in his office preparing for the day's meetings, assuming the call was about routine media management. "There's an article about you and Leora, specifically about the foundation gala." The reporter painted a picture of marital discord. Killian's blood turned cold. "What reporter?" "David Chen. He attended the gala, apparently had extensive conversations with your wife. The article suggests she was seeking comfort from other men due to your neglect." The words hit him like physical blows. Killian pulled up the Tribune's website, his hands surprisingly steady as he navigated to the article. "Behind the Charity Smile, When Success Costs Marriage" by David Chen. The headline alone made his jaw clench, but the content was worse. Chen had crafted a masterpiece of subtle innuendo, describing Leora as poised but melancholy, discussing her obvious loneliness and the distant dynamic between the Thornes. He had woven their dance floor conversation into a narrative of a neglected wife, finding solace in a stranger's attention. Most damaging was a quote that made Killian's chest tighten with recognition. Mrs. Thorne confided that she sometimes feels married to a ghost, suggesting a profound disconnection in what appears to be one of New York's power couples. The quotes are accurate. Rebecca's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "She said that to him," Killian confirmed quietly. "But the context doesn't matter. The narrative is already spreading. By noon, every gossip blog in the city will have picked this up." Killian closed his laptop, his mind racing through damage control scenarios. "Schedule a statement. We'll clarify that." "Killian," Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm, "a statement will only draw more attention. The best thing you can do right now is go home to your wife." He was already reaching for his jacket. The elevator ride to their penthouse felt eternal. Killian's mind churned through possible conversations, explanations, damage control strategies, but when he opened the door, he found Leora sitting at the kitchen island with the newspaper spread in front of her, her face pale and her hands shaking. Emma was beside her, one protective hand on her sister's shoulder. "What's wrong?" Leora looked up when Killian entered, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Did you see it?" "I saw it." He moved toward her carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Leora, I'm so sorry. I never thought he would write the truth." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the sharp edge of betrayal because he didn't he? "He wrote exactly what I told him." "Out of context," Killian said desperately. "I wasn't having an affair." Leora stood, the newspaper crinkling as she moved. "But I was desperately lonely. I was married to a man who acted like a ghost. He didn't lie about anything." Emma looked between them with growing alarm. "What's going on?" "What article?" Leora handed her sister the paper, watching as Emma's expression shifted from confusion to fury. "This is garbage," Emma declared. "Sensationalist trash designed to sell papers." "Is it?" Leora turned back to Killian. "Or is it an accurate portrayal of our marriage 3 weeks ago?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Killian could deny it, could focus on the invasion of privacy, the professional damage, the unfairness of having their personal struggles dissected in print. Instead, he told the truth. "It's accurate," he said quietly. 3 weeks ago, that was exactly what our marriage looked like." "Killian," Emma started, but Leora held up a hand. "At least you're honest about it." Leora's voice was steady now, controlled. "The question is, what happens now when your business partners read this? When my foundation board sees it? When everyone in our social circle knows that the perfect Thorne marriage is a facade?" "I don't care what they think," Killian said fiercely. "I care about you, about us, about our baby." The words seemed to hit Leora like a slap. She placed both hands protectively over her stomach, her face crumpling. "Our baby," she whispered. "God, Killian, our child is going to grow up with this in the internet archives. Someday, they'll be able to read about how their mother was lonely enough to confide in a stranger." "No." Killian moved toward her, but she stepped back. "Leora, no. This doesn't define us. This was 3 weeks ago. We're different now, are we?" She looked at him with devastating clarity. "Or are we just playing house until the next crisis hits? Until work becomes more important again? Until you remember that building an empire matters more than being present for your family? That's not fair, isn't it?" Leora's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm pregnant, Killian. I'm carrying our child. And the first thing the world is going to know about this baby is that their parents' marriage was so broken that strangers could see it from across a ballroom. Emma struggled to her feet, moving toward her sister with obvious concern. Lee, sit down. This dress isn't good for the baby. The baby. Leora laughed bitterly. How do I explain to our child someday that their father suspected me of infidelity before they were even born? Because that's what's going to happen, isn't it, Killian? What are you talking about? The timeline, the article, everyone's going to do the math. Her voice broke completely. They're going to wonder if this baby is even yours. The accusation hit Killian like a physical blow, partly because he could see the horrible logic of it. The article painted a picture of a lonely wife seeking comfort elsewhere. The pregnancy announcement coming so soon after the gala would inevitably raise questions. I would never think that, he said desperately. I know this baby is mine. Do you? Leora searched his face with laser-like intensity. Because when the whispers start, when people begin suggesting that maybe David Chen was more than just a sympathetic ear, will you still be so certain? Killian opened his mouth to deny it, to reassure her, to promise that his trust was absolute, but the moment of hesitation, barely a heartbeat but visible in his eyes, told Leora everything she needed to know. It stretched between them like a chasm, filled with everything they weren't saying, and everything they now couldn't own. Leora, Killian finally whispered, reaching toward her. She stepped back again, this time bumping into the kitchen counter. Don't. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to doubt me. Her voice was deadly quiet. You didn't mean to look at me like I'm a stranger who might be carrying another man's child. Emma hobbled closer, her crutches clicking against the marble floor. This is insane. Lee, you don't have to defend yourself against something this ridiculous. Don't I? Leora's laugh was hollow. Look at his face, Emma. Look at him trying to convince himself that his first instinct was wrong. Killian's jaw worked silently. He wanted to deny it, to reach for her, to promise that his love was stronger than any doubt, but the cruel logic of the situation had already taken root in his mind like poison. The timeline was problematic. 7 weeks pregnant, conception occurring during the worst period of their marriage, and David Chen, charming, attentive David Chen, had somehow managed to get more genuine emotion from Leora in 20 minutes than Killian had in months. The baby is yours, Leora said with devastating clarity, watching his internal struggle play across his features. But the fact that you're standing there doing mental calculations tells me everything I need to know about what you really think of me. That's not. Killian started, but she cut him off. Fair, true. She echoed the words from their dance weeks ago, but now they carried a bitter weight. When our child asks about their parents someday, should I tell them that their father loved their mother so little that he suspected her of adultery? I love you, Killian said desperately. I've never stopped loving you. Love isn't enough if it doesn't come with trust. Leora moved toward the bedroom, her movements sharp and purposeful. I can't do this anymore. What are you doing? Emma called after her, alarmed. Packing. The word hit Killian like a physical blow. He followed her down the hallway, finding her in their walk-in closet, pulling clothes from hangers with mechanical precision. Don't leave, he said. Please, we can work through this. Can we? Leora didn't look at him, focused on folding a sweater with unnecessary care. Can you work through, wondering if every milestone, every feature? I don't suspect. You hesitated. She finally turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. When I asked if you trusted me completely, you hesitated. That hesitation is going to poison everything between us. Killian watched helplessly as she packed essentials into an overnight bag. Each item that disappeared felt like another piece of their life together being dismantled. Where will you go? He asked quietly. My mother's, until I can find a place of my own. Leora, please. He reached for her hands, stilling their movement. I made a mistake. One moment of doubt doesn't erase everything we've rebuilt, doesn't it? She looked down at their joined hands. You spent months treating me like I was invisible. Then, the moment another man showed me basic human kindness, you decided I was capable of betrayal. What does that say about how you see me? The question hung between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth of it. Killian's doubt hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from his own guilt, his own knowledge of how badly he had failed her as a husband. I see someone who deserved better than what I gave her, and now you see someone who might have betrayed you because of it. No, Killian's voice was fierce. I see someone I failed so completely that I don't know how to trust that she could still choose me. The admissions stopped Leora's packing. She looked at him with something that might have been understanding, if understanding could coexist with heartbreak. That's the problem, isn't it? She said softly. You can't believe that anyone could love you without conditions. So you're looking for proof that I don't. The psychological insight was so accurate, it left Killian speechless. I'm tired of having to prove my love to you, Leora continued, zipping the bag closed. I'm tired of feeling like I'm failing some test I didn't know I was taking, and I'm exhausted from loving someone who's always waiting for me to leave. I'm not waiting for you to leave, Killian protested, but even as he said it, he recognized the pattern she was describing. Then why did you look relieved when you thought I might have betrayed you? Leora's voice was gentle now, almost clinical. Because it would prove you were right to keep your distance, right not to trust completely, right to protect yourself. The truth of her words hit him like cold water. Had he been sabotaging their relationship from a place of fear? Had his doubt been less about her faithfulness and more about his own deep-seated belief that happiness was temporary, that love was conditional? Don't psychoanalyze me, he said weakly. I'm just tired. Leora picked up her bag, moving toward the door. I'm tired of being married to someone who's always preparing for me to hurt him. Emma was waiting in the living room, her own bag packed despite her mobility limitations. I'm coming with you, she announced when Leora appeared. You don't have to be. You're going through this pregnant and alone because your husband is an emotional coward. Someone needs to take care of you. The criticism stung partly because it was accurate. Killian had let his own fears and insecurities destroy the one thing that mattered most to him. Emma's right, he said quietly. You shouldn't be alone right now. Leora paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't read. I've been alone for months, Killian. This is just making it official. The elevator doors closed on his wife and sister Winla, leaving Killian alone in the penthouse that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. He stood in the foyer for a long time, surrounded by the remnants of their brief happiness. Emma's art supplies on the dining table, prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter, a pregnancy bookmarked with plans for the nursery. His phone buzzed with messages, reporters wanting comments, business associates offering support or subtle inquiries about the Tribune article, his mother demanding to know if the rumors about marital problems were true. He ignored them all, instead opening his laptop to compose an email to his assistant. He would need the best family law attorney in the city, not for a divorce, but to understand his rights as a father, if Leora decided their separation was permanent. As he typed, one thought echoed in his mind with devastating clarity. He had gotten exactly what his subconscious had been preparing for. He had successfully driven away the one person who loved him unconditionally, proving to himself that he was indeed unworthy of that love. The cruelest irony was that in doing so, he had also driven away his child, a child who would now grow up knowing their father as the man who doubted their mother's faithfulness, rather than the man who loved their family enough to fight for it. Outside, storm clouds that had been gathering all week finally opened, rain lashing against the windows of the empty penthouse where Killian sat alone with the consequences of his fear. The law office of Hamilton and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, its sterile elegance reflecting the cold efficiency of Manhattan's legal elite. Killian sat across from Margaret Hamilton, one of the city's most formidable family attorneys, as she reviewed the divorce papers spread across her mahogany desk. Everything appears to be in order, Margaret said, her voice professionally neutral. The grounds for irreconcilable differences are clearly stated. Property division, spousal support arrangements, it's all very straightforward. 7 months since Leora had walked out of their penthouse. 7 months since he'd seen her face or heard her voice. The only question, Margaret continued, is whether you want to proceed with service. We can have these delivered by courier, or no. Killian's voice was sharp. I'll deliver them myself. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. That's unusual, and potentially confrontational. Are you sure that's wise? Killian stared at the papers that would legally end his marriage. After months of Emma's careful updates about doctor's appointments and Lyra's health, he knew the baby was due any day now. His child, because, despite everything, despite his fears and suspicions, he knew in his heart that the baby was his. She deserves to hear it from me, he said finally, not from some stranger with legal papers, Mr. Thorne. Margaret leaned forward, her expression concerned. I have to ask, Are you certain this is what you want? Divorce papers delivered during or immediately after childbirth could be seen as cruel. Killian's laugh was bitter. I've been cruel for months. At least this way, it's honest cruelty. The truth was more complex than he could explain to his attorney. Part of him hoped that seeing Leora again would somehow resolve the questions that had been eating at him for months. Part of him wanted to look at their child and know finally and definitively whether his suspicions had any merit. And part of him, the part he barely admitted to himself, hoped that she would fight for their marriage, that she would refuse to sign, would demand that they try again. Margaret handed him the manila envelope containing their future apart. The papers need to be signed and notarized. If she agrees to the terms, the divorce can be finalized within 60 days. And if she doesn't agree, then you'll need to decide what you really want. The manila envelope beside him like a loaded weapon. Emma's last text had been 3 days ago. Any day now, she's ready. Ready to be a mother. Ready to bring their child into the world. Eleanor Raines's house looked exactly as he'd imagined. Charming, welcoming, the kind of place where children grew up feeling loved and secure, the kind of place his own childhood had lacked, where emotional warmth mattered more than financial success. He sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes, the envelope growing heavier in his hands. Once he knocked on that door, once he handed Leora these papers, there would be no going back. Their marriage would be over, legally and finally. But wasn't it already over? Hadn't died 7 months ago when his doubt had proved stronger than his trust. Emma was helping someone out of the passenger seat, someone moving slowly, carefully, with the unmistakable gait of a woman in early labor. Leora Killian was out of his car before conscious thought kicked in. The envelope forgotten on the dashboard. She looked radiant despite the obvious discomfort. Her auburn hair pulled back, her face glowing with the anticipation and fear that came with approaching motherhood. Leora, her name came out as barely more than a whisper. She turned at the sound of his voice, her green eyes going wide with shock. Killian, what are you doing here? He looked back toward his car, toward the papers that had seemed so important moments ago. I came to see you, to talk now. Emma's voice was sharp with protective anger. She's in labor. Killian, we were just coming back from the hospital. They sent us home to wait until the contractions get stronger. Labor. The word hit him like a physical blow. The baby's coming. Babies tend to do that, Leora said with a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's how they get born. For a moment, they stood in Lilianar's driveway. 7 months of separation and hurt between them while their child prepared to make its entrance into the world. I should go, Killian said, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I shouldn't be here. Not now. Why are you here? Leora asked, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly as another contraction began. After 7 months of silence, why today? He could lie. He could say he'd come to reconcile, to beg for forgiveness, to be present for the birth of their child. All of those things contained fragments of truth, but the manila envelope in his car told a different story. I have papers for you, he said quietly. Legal papers. Understanding dawned in Leora's eyes, followed by something that looked like profound sadness. Divorce papers? Yes, you came to divorce me while I'm in labor. Her voice was steady, but he could see the hurt beneath the calm exterior. The timing. I didn't know you were in labor. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly seeing how this looked. I wanted it to be final. Clean. Leora nodded slowly. Emma moved closer to her sister, her expression murderous. Lee, you don't have to deal with this right now. We can go inside. No. Leora Unk's voice was firm. If Killian wants to end our marriage, he should at least have the courage to do it to my face. The accusation stung because it was accurate. For 7 months, he had been ending their marriage by degrees. Through silence, through absence, through the slow erosion of trust and connection. The papers were just making it official. I'll get them from the car, he said quietly. Don't. The sharpness in Leora's voice stopped him. Don't you dare get those papers while I'm standing here in labor with your child. Then, when? The question came out harder than he'd intended. When is the right time to admit that we've both given up? I haven't given up, Leora said fiercely. I left because I couldn't watch you destroy us with your suspicions and your fear. But I never gave up. The autumn afternoon was crisp and beautiful. Rather than the finality of divorce papers, I saw you laughing with that reporter, Killian said, the words coming out like a confession. The way you used to laugh with me, and I realized I hadn't made you happy in months. So you decided I must be having an affair. I decided I wasn't enough for you anymore. Leora's expression softened slightly. Oh, Killian, you were never not enough. You were just not there. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Leora gripped Emma's arm for support. When it passed, she looked at Killian with devastating clarity. Our baby is going to be born today, she said quietly, and you're standing in my mother's driveway with divorce papers, instead of being excited to become a father. I am excited, Killian said desperately. I've been excited and terrified and completely lost for months. Then prove it. Leora's voice carried the strength that had first attracted him to her. Leave the papers in your car and come with us to the hospital. Be there when your child is born, and after what happens after. After we figure out what kind of parents we want to be. Whether we do that as a family or separately is up to you. The choice was stark and simple. He could retreat to the safety of legal documents and clean endings, or he could step into the messy uncertainty of birth and love and the possibility of redemption. Killian looked toward his car where the divorce papers waited like a safety net. Then he looked at Leora, beautiful and strong and about to give birth to their child. I want to come with you, he said simply. Then come. As they helped Leora into Emma's car, Killian made a conscious decision to leave the papers behind. Whatever happened next, whatever they decided about their marriage, it could wait until after they welcomed their child into the world. For now, for the first time in 7 months, he was choosing to be present for what mattered most. Elilana Rains's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. The kind of domestic warmth that Killian's childhood home had never possessed. He sat at the worn oak table, nervously turning a coffee mug between his hands, while Leora's mother studied him with the laser-focused attention of a woman whose daughter had been heartbroken. So Eleanor said, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her blue eyes so like Leora's missing nothing. You want my blessing to hurt my daughter again? Mom, Leora protested from her chair beside him, but Eleanor held up a hand. I'm 63 years old, Leora. I've seen enough men make enough promises to know the difference between pretty words and genuine change. She turned back to Killian. What makes you think you're ready to be a husband and father now? It was a fair question, one Killian had been asking himself during the drive to Connecticut. I don't know if I'm ready, he said honestly, but I know I'm tired of being afraid, tired of protecting myself from being hurt by hurting the people I love first. Fear isn't an excuse for cruelty, Eleanor said quietly. No. It's not. Killian met her gaze steadily. I was cruel to Leora. I doubted her loyalty because I couldn't believe I deserved it. I pushed her away because I was convinced she would leave eventually anyway. Emma hobbled into the kitchen, having apparently been listening from the doorway. At least you admit it, Emma, Leora warned, but her sister was undeterred. What? He's been emotionally absent for months while you've been carrying his child. I think a little honesty is the least we can expect. I didn't abandon her, Killian said, then stopped. Actually, I did. Not physically, but emotionally. I've been emotionally absent for years. The admission surprised everyone, including himself. But sitting in this warm kitchen, surrounded by the family that had cared for Leora, while he wallowed in self-pity, Killian finally saw his behavior clearly. I built walls around myself, he continued, his voice gaining strength. I told myself it was about success, about providing for our future. But really, I was protecting myself from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone completely. And now, Elilana's tone had softened slightly. Now, I'd rather be vulnerable with Leora than safe without her. He turned to look at his wife, taking in the way. Late afternoon sunlight caught the gold threads in her hair. I want to be present for our child's life, not just financially or nominally, but really present. I want to know their favorite foods and their bedtime stories, and the way they laugh when they're truly happy. Leora's eyes filled with tears. Killian, I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved, he said, reaching for her hands. Completely, trustingly, without reservation or escape plans. Eleanor studied the interaction with the shrewd attention of a woman who had watched her daughter's heart break in slow motion. Finally, she stood and moved to the stove where something delicious was simmering. You can stay for dinner, she announced, but you sleep in the guest room until you prove you've actually changed. Mom, Leora's cheeks flushed pink. You're 8½ months pregnant with his child. And he just showed up with divorce papers instead of being the husband you need, Eleanor said matter-of-factly. A little courtship won't hurt either of you. Killian found himself smiling for the first time in months. Thank you, Mrs. Rains. Call me Eleanor, And don't thank me yet. I haven't decided if I like you. Dinner was a revelation. Killian couldn't remember the last time he'd sat around a table with people who actually talked to each other, who shared stories and laughed at inside jokes, and argued about politics with genuine affection. Emma regaled them with tales of her physical therapy adventures, while Eleanor shared updates on neighborhood gossip with the practiced skill of a woman who had lived in the same community for 30 years. The Hendersons' youngest got into Harvard, Eleanor said, passing a bowl of green beans. Full scholarship. That's wonderful, Leora said, but Killian could see the slight tension around her eyes. She had always been sensitive about achievements and expectations, probably wondering how her current situation measured against the success stories Eleanor was sharing. Of course, they're worried sick about him being so far from home, Eleanor continued. Sarah Henderson cried for an hour when he called to tell them the news. Why? Killian asked, genuinely curious. Because she's going to miss him, Elena said, as if it were obvious. Because watching your children grow up and leave is the hardest part of being a parent, even when it's what you want for them. The comment hit differently than Killian had expected. He thought about his own parents who had celebrated his achievements, but had never seemed to struggle with his independence. Had they missed him when he left for college, for business school, for his new life in Manhattan? Or had they been relieved to have successfully raised a self-sufficient child? What about your parents? Emma asked, echoing his thoughts. Are they excited about becoming grandparents? Killian set down his fork carefully. I haven't told them yet. The silence that followed was deafening. You haven't told them? Leora's voice was very quiet. I was waiting until he trailed off, realizing how awful the truth sounded. Until you decided whether you wanted to be involved in the baby's life. Eleanor's tone had returned to its earlier sharpness. No, until I knew if Leora would let me be involved. The distinction felt important, but judging by the expressions around the table, it wasn't. But you. Leora's voice carried a note of warning. Killian, this is your child. I never said you couldn't be involved, but you left. I left because you didn't trust me, not because I wanted to keep you away from our baby. She struggled to stand, her movements awkward with the weight of pregnancy. The back porch overlooked Elana's garden, where autumn flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. Killian found Leora there, sitting on the swing that probably dated back to her childhood, her hands resting on her belly. You hurt me again, she corrected. Do you really think I would use our child as a weapon against you? No, the answer came without hesitation. I think I've been so afraid of being hurt that I've been interpreting everything you do as potential abandonment. Leora was quiet for a long moment, the swing creaking gently as they moved back and forth. I was going to tell them after the baby was born. When I knew, he stopped, realizing how it sounded. When you knew if it was really yours. The question hung between them like a ghost. Killian had told himself the timing was about reconciliation, about not getting his parents' hopes up if things didn't work out between him and Leora. But underneath, the ugly truth remained. Some part of him had still been harboring doubt. I know the baby is mine, he said quietly. I've known it all along, even when I pretended I didn't. Because admitting the baby was mine meant admitting I was the kind of man who could drive away his pregnant wife over his own insecurities. Killian's voice broke slightly. It meant facing the fact that I'm just like my father, so emotionally unavailable that love feels like a foreign concept. Leora turned to study his profile in the fading light. You're not your father, aren't I? Cold, distant, more comfortable with business relationships than personal ones, unable to trust that people could love me without an agenda. Your father never sat on my mother's porch swing, admitting his mistakes, Leora said softly. He never fought for anyone or anything that didn't come with a contract. But I almost lost you the same way he lost every meaningful relationship in his life, almost. Leora reached for his hand. But you didn't. You're here now. As if responding to their conversation, the baby gave a particularly strong kick that made Leora gasp and grab her side. Are you okay? Killian's hand instinctively moved to her belly, and he felt his child move beneath his palm for the first time. The sensation was indescribable. Proof of life, of love, of a future that was both terrifying and wonderful. That's our baby, Leora whispered, covering his hand with hers. Our baby. He repeated the words, feeling like a prayer. They sat in the gathering twilight, feeling their child move between them, and for the first time in months, Killian allowed himself to hope that it wasn't too late to become the man his family deserved. 3 days later, Killian woke to the sound of urgent voices downstairs. He had been staying in Eleanor's guest room, a small space with floral wallpaper and photographs of Leora's childhood that made him ache with tenderness for the girl who had grown into the woman he had almost lost. "Mom," called Dr. Martinez. Leora Unk's voice carried up the stairs, tight with controlled panic. "The contractions are getting stronger." Killian was out of bed and down the stairs before he fully registered what he had heard. He found Leora in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, as Emma rubbed her back with practiced comfort. "How far apart?" Eleanor asked, already reaching for her phone. "About 7 minutes," Leora managed between breaths. "They started around 3 this morning, but they're getting more intense." "Huss, time," Eleanor declared with the authority of someone who had been through this before. "I'll get the car," Killian said, already moving toward his keys. "No." Leora's voice stopped him cold. "I want Emma to drive me." The rejection hit him like a physical blow. After 3 days of careful rebuilding, of shared meals, and tentative conversations, she still didn't trust him with the most important moment of their lives. "Lee," Emma said gently, "let Killian drive. You need someone who can focus completely on you, and I can't do that with my leg still healing." "I can focus," Leora began, then doubled over as another contraction hit. Emma's voice was firm but kind. "This is his child, too. Let him be part of this." Eleanor appeared with an overnight bag that had apparently been packed for weeks. "The 3 of you can sort out transportation logistics in the car. This baby isn't going to wait for relationship negotiations." The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and increasingly frequent contractions. Killian gripped the steering wheel, hyper-aware of every bump in the road while trying to project calm competence. In the passenger seat, Leora breathed through contractions with the focused intensity of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. "You're doing great," he said during a lull between contractions, catching her eye in the rearview mirror where Emma sat with her. "Don't patronize me," Leora snapped, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help." "You don't have to apologize for being in labor," Killian said with a slight smile. "I think you're allowed to be a little irritable." "A little," Emma muttered from the back seat. "Lee, remember when you threw your pregnancy pillow at me yesterday because I suggested you might want to consider an epidural?" Despite the pain, Leora laughed. That was assault with a decorative weapon. The familiar banter between the sisters eased some of the tension in the car, reminding Killian of what he had missed during their months apart. This easy intimacy, this ability to find humor even in stressful moments. It was what made Leora's family feel like home, in a way his own never had. At the hospital, everything moved with controlled efficiency. Leora was admitted quickly, settled into a birthing suite with monitors and IVs that made the reality of the situation suddenly concrete. Their baby was coming today. "I need to call my parents," Killian said when they had a quiet moment between medical staff visits. Leora nodded, though she looked nervous. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth, that I'm about to become a father and I should have told them months ago." He squeezed her hand. "That I've been an idiot, but I'm trying to do better." The phone call was brief and awkward, conducted in the hallway outside Leora's room. His mother's shocked silence spoke volumes, while his father's clipped questions about timing and logistics avoided any emotional territory entirely. "We'll be there tomorrow," his mother said finally, "to meet our grandchild." "Good," Killian said, meaning it. "I want them to know they're grandparents." When he returned to the room, Leora was in the middle of a particularly intense contraction. Her face was flushed with exertion, her hand gripping the bedrail until her knuckles were white. "Can I?" Killian gestured toward her other hand. She nodded, and he took her hand in both of his, providing an anchor through the wave of pain. When the contraction subsided, she didn't pull away. "How did the call go?" she asked. "About as well as expected. They're coming tomorrow to meet the baby." "Are you ready for that?" Killian considered the question seriously. "I'm ready to do things differently than they did, to be present, even when it's complicated." Dr. Martinez arrived to check Leora's progress, her professional demeanor slightly softened by obvious affection for her patient. 6 centimeters, she announced. "Things are progressing nicely. How are you handling the pain?" "I'm managing," Leora said through gritted teeth. "There's no medal for suffering," Dr. Martinez said kindly. "If you want an epidural, now would be a good time." Leora looked uncertain, and Killian found himself remembering conversations from months ago about her birth plan, her desire to experience labor naturally, if possible. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly, not trying to influence her decision, but making it clear that whatever she chose would be supported. I want to wait a little longer, Leora decided. See how much stronger they get. Okay, we wait. The next few hours passed in a blur of increasing intensity. Ice chips, back rubs, someone to breathe with through contractions that grew progressively more demanding. Emma proved invaluable, anticipating needs and providing the kind of comfort that came from years of sisterly devotion. I can't do this, Leora gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. It's too much. Yes, you can, Killian said firmly, meeting her eyes. You're the strongest person I know. You've been carrying our baby and dealing with my stupidity for months. If anyone can do this, it's you. Easy for you to say, she panted. You're not. Another contraction cut off her words. You're right, Killian acknowledged when she could focus again. I can't do this for you, but I can do it with you. Dr. Martinez returned, her expression growing more serious after the examination. We're at transition 9 centimeters. Things are going to get intense very quickly now. She was right. The next hour was the hardest thing Killian had ever witnessed. Leora fought through contractions that seemed impossible to endure, her entire being focused on the monumental task of bringing their child into the world. I need to push, she announced suddenly. Not yet, Dr. Martinez said, checking again. Almost, but not quite. I need you to breathe through the next few contractions without pushing. I can't. Yes, you can. Killian moved closer, his face level with hers. Look at me. Breathe with me. They breathed together through 3 more contractions that had Leora gripping his hand hard enough to leave marks. When Dr. Martinez finally gave permission to push, Killian felt his world shift into sharp, urgent focus. I can see the head, Dr. Martinez announced. One more big push, Leora. With a sound that was part roar, part prayer, Leora gave everything she had to bringing their child into the world. It's a boy. Dr. Martinez's voice was jubilant as she lifted a small, perfect form covered in birth fluids and indignation. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy and absolutely beautiful. He's perfect, Killian whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. Dr. Martinez placed the baby on Leora's chest, and Killian watched his wife transform into someone even more radiant than he had thought possible. Hi, baby, Leora whispered, her voice breaking with exhaustion and joy. We've been waiting so long to meet you. The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes, Killian's eyes, seeming to focus on his mother's face with newborn intensity. He knows you, Killian said in wonder. He should. We've been talking to each other for months. Leora looked up at Killian, her face glowing with happiness and love. Do you want to hold him? With careful hands that shook slightly, Killian accepted his son. The baby was smaller than he had expected, but felt substantial in a way that made his chest tighten with fierce protectiveness. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your daddy. I know I haven't been around much, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. As if responding to his voice, the baby's tiny hand grasped Killian's finger with surprising strength. What should we call him? Leora asked softly. They had discussed names months ago before everything fell apart, but those conversations felt like they belonged to different people. Ezra, Killian said without hesitation. Ezra James Thorne. Ezra, Leora repeated, testing the sound. I like it. Strong but gentle like his mother. As Killian held his son and looked into Leora's exhausted, radiant face, he felt something settle into place inside his chest. This was his family. This was what mattered. Everything else, work, fear, pride, even his own insecurities, was secondary to this moment. This perfect tiny person who carried the best of both his parents. For the first time in his adult life, Killian Thorne knew exactly where he belonged. 2 days after Ezra's birth, Killian stood in the doorway of Leora's hospital room, watching his wife nurse their son in the early morning light. The scene was so peaceful, so fundamentally right that he almost didn't want to disturb it. How long have you been standing there? Leora asked without looking up, a smile in her voice. Long enough to memorize every detail, Killian admitted, moving closer. I never want to forget how you look right now. Exhausted and wearing a hospital gown, like the most beautiful woman in the world holding our perfect son. Ezra had finished eating and was making the small, contented sounds that newborns made when they were settling into sleep. His dark hair was starting to show traces of auburn, and when he opened his eyes, they held the same intelligent depth as his mother's. Your parents will be here soon, Leora said, shifting Ezra to her shoulder to burp him. I know. Are you ready for that? Are you? It was a fair question. Richard and Catherine Thorne were formidable people. Brilliant, successful, and emotionally reserved in ways that had shaped Killian's own struggles with intimacy. The thought of them meeting Ezra, of trying to bridge decades of careful distance, felt both necessary and terrifying. I've been thinking about what kind of father I want to be, Killian said, settling into the chair beside Leora's bed. What kind of husband I want to be. And what did you decide? Present, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I don't know what I'm doing, even when it would be easier to hide behind work or fear or pride. Leora studied his profile as he watched their son. That's a big promise. It's the only promise that matters. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Emma peeked around the door, her arms full of coffee cups and what appeared to be homemade muffins. Emergency caffeine delivery, she announced. Mom sent blueberry muffins because she's convinced hospital food will compromise Lee's milk supply. Your mother is a treasure, Killian said, accepting a coffee gratefully. She likes you better now, Emma said with characteristic directness, though she's still reserving final judgment until she sees how you handle sleepless nights and dirty diapers. Fair enough. Another knock. Genuine affection for her patients. Ready to take this little guy home? She asked. Home, Leora repeated, and Killian caught the note of uncertainty in her voice. They hadn't discussed living arrangements beyond the immediate future. Leora's things were still at her mother's house while the penthouse in Manhattan sat empty, except for the memories of their failed first attempt at marriage. We should talk about that, Killian said quietly after Dr. Martinez left. About what? Where home is for all of us. Leora was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Ezra's back. I can't go back to the way things were, Killian. The penthouse, the dinner parties, the life where work comes first and family gets whatever's left over. I don't want that either. Killian reached for her free hand. What if we started over, found a place that belongs to who we are now, not who we were before? You'd give up the penthouse. I'd give up everything except you and Ezra. The simple certainty in his voice made Leora's eyes fill with tears. What about your company? The expansion plans. The company will survive. I've got good people in place, and I've learned that delegation isn't a sign of weakness. Killian smiled ruefully. It took almost losing my family to realize that success doesn't mean anything if you have no one to share it with. Before Leora could respond, voices in the hallway announced the arrival of the elder Thornes. Catherine Thorne appeared first, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her expression carefully controlled as she took in the scene. Killian. Her voice carried the familiar note of formal affection that had characterized their relationship for decades. Mother, Dad. Killian stood, suddenly aware of how different he must seem to them. Rumpled from days at the hospital, his usual polished facade replaced by something more genuine. His tall frame and austere features making him seem more like a business associate than a new grandfather. But when his eyes fell on Ezra, something shifted in his expression. This is Ezra, Killian said, his voice soft with pride. Your grandson. Catherine approached the bed with cautious steps, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. Leora, dear, how are you feeling? Leora nodded, carefully transferring Ezra to his grandmother's arms. Catherine held him with surprising competence, her usually composed features softening as she studied his face. He has your chin, Killian, she said quietly, and Leora's eyes. He's perfect, Richard added, though he maintained his distance as if unsure how to navigate this new terrain of grandfatherhood. Would you like to hold him? Leora offered. Richard looked surprised by the invitation, but he accepted Ezra with the careful attention he had once reserved for important business documents. For a moment, the austere businessman disappeared, replaced by a man discovering wonder in a tiny person who shared his blood. I was wrong, Richard said suddenly, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. About what? About priorities, about what makes a successful life. Richard's eyes remained fixed on Ezra's face. I spent your childhood thinking that providing financial security was the same as being a good father. I missed everything that mattered. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. Catherine's eyes filled with tears while Killian felt years of resentment and misunderstanding begin to shift into something more complex. You can do better with him, Richard continued, finally looking at his son. Be present in ways I never was. I plan to, Killian said simply. Good. Richard's smile was tentative, but genuine. He deserves better than I gave you. Catherine moved closer to her husband and grandson, creating a tableau that felt both foreign and hopeful. We'd like to be involved, she said carefully, in his life, in your lives, if you'll have us. Leora looked at Killian, seeing in his face the same cautious hope she was feeling. We'd like that, too. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, car seat installation, and the surreal experience of walking out of the hospital as a family of 3. Killian drove with exaggerated care while Leora watched Ezra's every breath from the back seat. Where to? Killian asked as they reached the end of the hospital driveway. Your mother's, Leora said, for now, while we figure out what comes next. Together, Killian said, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. As they drove through the Connecticut countryside toward Eleanor's house, Ezra sleeping peacefully in his car seat, Killian felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't the ending he had planned or even imagined, but it was better than anything he could have designed. He was no longer the man who had doubted his wife's faithfulness out of his own fear. A man who had learned that love required courage more than certainty, presence more than perfection. The divorce papers he had prepared still sat abandoned at Eleanor's house, forgotten in the joy of meeting his son. Those papers, symbols of his fear and doubt, would remain unsigned, eventually becoming nothing more than a reminder of the future he had almost chosen out of fear. But this future, messy, uncertain, requiring him to be better than he had ever been, was the one he would fight for every day for the rest of his life. As Eleanor's house came into view, Killian made a silent promise to his sleeping son and the woman he loved more than his own safety. He would never again choose fear over family, protection over presence, or anything over the precious, fragile, beautiful love that had given him a second chance at becoming the man he was meant to be. 5 years later, the kitchen of the colonial house in Westchester buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a garden where autumn flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds, a garden that Killian had learned to maintain under Eleanor's patient instruction. Daddy, look! 5-year-old Ezra burst through the back door, his dark hair told from playing outside, his green eyes bright with excitement. In his small hands, he clutched a butterfly that had apparently been willing to cooperate with his gentle curiosity. That's beautiful, buddy, Killian said, setting down his coffee to examine the butterfly properly. What kind do you think it is? A monarch. Grandma Eleanor showed me the book. Ezra opened his hands carefully, watching as the butterfly spread its wings and flew toward the window. Leora appeared in the doorway, her hair shorter than it had been 5 years ago, her face carrying the settled contentment of a woman who had found her place in the world. She wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, but to Killian, she had never looked more beautiful. Emma's here, she announced, and she's brought someone. The mysterious boyfriend, Killian asked with a grin. Leora confirmed, who is apparently a pediatric surgeon and doesn't know what he's getting himself into. Emma's laughter echoed from the front hallway, followed by a deeper voice that suggested her companion was indeed present and accounted for. She appeared in the kitchen moments later, practically glowing with happiness, her arm linked through that of a tall man with kind eyes and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone meeting the full force of the Rains family for the first time. Everyone, this is Dr. James Mitchell, Emma announced with obvious pride. James, this is my sister Leora, my brother-in-law Killian, and the infamous Ezra. Hi, Ezra said with the uninhibited friendliness of a child who had grown up surrounded by love. Are you going to marry Aunt Emma? Ezra Leora laughed, but James took the question in stride. I'm hoping she'll say yes when I ask her properly, he replied with a smile that made Emma's cheeks flush pink. When? Ezra demanded with 5-year-old directness. Ezra James Thorne, Killian said with mock sternness. What have we talked about regarding personal questions? That some things are private, Ezra recited dutifully. But Aunt Emma tells me everything anyway. Not everything, Emma protested, then caught sight of her nephew's skeptical expression. Okay, most things, but this is different. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the elder Thornes, who had become regular fixtures in their lives over the past 5 years. The transformation of Killian's parents from distant figures to doing grandparents had been gradual but genuine, marked by Sunday dinners, bedtime story readings, and Richard's surprising talent for building elaborate toy castles. Grandpa Ezra raced toward the front door, his earlier butterfly forgotten, in favor of his grandfather's arrival. "There's my boy." Richard's voice carried the warmth that had taken years to develop, but now came naturally. "Did you finish the puzzle we started last week?" "Mostly. Daddy helped with the hard parts." Killian followed the conversation as it moved into the living room. Watching his father engage with Ezra in ways that still sometimes surprised him, Catherine had proven equally devoted, though her affection manifested in more practical ways: piano lessons, art supplies, and a college fund that she had started the day after Ezra's birth. "He's so different," Leora said quietly, moving beside Killian as they watched the family chaos unfold. "Dad, she slipped her arms around his waist from behind. 5 years ago, you would have been checking your phone by now, thinking about work." It was true. The Killian of 5 years ago would have been mentally reviewing Monday's meetings, answering emails, finding reasons to step away from the domestic scene. This Killian had learned to be present in a way that still occasionally surprised him. "Different how?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Happy. Really, genuinely happy. Like you've stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop." The insight was accurate. Somewhere in the past 5 years, Killian had stopped living in anticipation of loss, and had learned to trust in the permanence of love. It hadn't been easy. Moments when the weight of parenthood and marriage had felt overwhelming, but they had navigated each challenge together, building something stronger than what they had lost. "The company's doing well," Killian said, settling back against her. "The restructuring worked. I've got good people in place, and you're home for dinner every night." "And I'm home for dinner every night," he confirmed. It had been a conscious choice, scaling back his direct involvement in the day-to-day operations of Thorne Technologies. He remained chairman of the board and major shareholder, but he had promoted trusted colleagues to handle the demands that had once consumed his life. "No regrets?" Leora asked. "Only one." "What's that?" "That it took me so long to figure out what mattered." Eleanor's arrival completed the gathering, her arms full of the ingredients for what would undoubtedly be an elaborate family dinner. At 75, she moved with the energy of someone who had found purpose in spoiling her grandson and managing the complex logistics of their extended family. "James," she said warmly, embracing Emma's boyfriend with the kind of immediate acceptance that had once taken Killian years to earn. "Welcome to the madness." "Thank you for having me," James replied, and Killian could see him beginning to understand what Emma had tried to explain about her family's particular brand of loving chaos. Dinner was served in the dining room that had once belonged only to Eleanor, but now served as the heart of their combined households. The conversation flowed between Emma's work as a freelance designer, James' stories from the pediatric ward, Elena's updates on neighborhood politics, and the elder Thorne's plans for their upcoming trip to visit Catherine's sister in California. "Will you bring me something from California?" Ezra asked his grandparents. "What would you like?" Catherine asked indulgently. "A seashell, a big one that sounds like the ocean when you hold it to your ear." "I think we can manage that," Richard said, with the kind of smile that had become natural over the years. After dinner, as the adults lingered over coffee and Ezra played with building blocks on the living room floor, Killian found himself studying the scene with something approaching disbelief. This was his life now, messy, complicated, full of people and noise and love. Leora asked, following his gaze. "Just this, all of it." He gestured at the gathering. 5 years ago, I almost threw it all away because I was too afraid to trust that it was real." "But you didn't throw it away." "We didn't throw it away," he corrected. "And now I know that love isn't something that happens to you. Especially when it's hard." As the evening wound down and family members began the ritual of gathering coats and saying goodbyes, Ezra climbed into Killian's lap with the boneless trust of a tired child. "Daddy," he said sleepily, "will you tell me the story about how you and Mommy fell in love?" It was a favorite bedtime request, though Killian suspected that Ezra was more interested in delaying sleep than in hearing the familiar tale. Once upon a time, Killian began settling his son more comfortably. There was a man who thought he had everything he needed. He had a big company, and a fancy apartment, and more money than he could spend. But he was lonely, Ezra added, having heard the story many times before. But he was very lonely, until one day he met a beautiful woman who showed him that having everything doesn't matter if you don't have someone to share it with. And then what happened? Then the man made some mistakes, big ones. He forgot to pay attention to the people he loved most, and he almost lost them because he was too afraid to believe that love could last. But it did last, Ezra said with 5-year-old certainty. It did last because love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. And every day your mommy and I choose to love each other and to love you. Even when you argue, especially when we argue, because that's when choosing love is hardest and most important. Ezra considered this with the seriousness that children brought to life's big questions. I choose to love you too, Daddy. I'm very glad, Killian said, his throat tight with emotion, because you're the best thing that ever happened to me. As Leora tucked Ezra into bed and Killian cleaned up the remnants of their family gathering, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, angry man who had once sat in a lawyer's office preparing for custody battles felt like a stranger now. Later, as he and Leora settled into their own bed in the house they had chosen together, a house with a garden and good schools and enough space for the family they were still building, Killian pulled his wife close and marveled at the simple miracle of her presence. I love you, he said into the darkness, words that had become both prayer and promise. I love you too, she replied, her voice carrying 5 years of shared struggles and triumphs. Outside their window, the Connecticut countryside settled into autumn silence. In the room down the hall, their son slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds dream. And in their bed, Killian and Leora held each other with the quiet confidence of people who had learned that love, when chosen daily and protected fiercely, could indeed last forever. The man who had once been too afraid to trust in happiness had learned to not only accept it, but to nurture it, to choose it, and to build a life worthy of the love he had been given. In a world where relationships often crumble under pressure, do you believe it's possible for people to truly change and rebuild trust after betraying the ones they love most? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories